They executed all of them. I watched. I counted. 10 scouts, 10 shots. But here's the thing. One of them stood back up. It began with a broadcast. Not a leak, not a covert message or a pirate frequency, but a full-blown, sanctioned galactic transmission sent from the high chairs of the Warlord Coalition to every corner of controlled space. They didn't just kill Earth scouts, they made it a spectacle. The execution arena was a gleaming marble circle hanging in orbit above Cal Vexus Prime, a luxury blood sport station. Onlookers in robes, armor, and lavish exosuits stood behind crystalline shields, drinking spiced vapors and clapping as if watching a fireworks show. The scouts were lined up in front of a golden dais, each bound at the wrists with radiation-hardened shackles. Cameras circled them like vultures, broadcasting every breath. And behind them stood the Crimson Spine, draped in blood-red mesh armor that rippled like fluid steel. His voice boomed as he made a speech about Earth's cowardice, resistance, and eventual obedience. Then he gave the order. One by one, the scouts were executed. No blindfolds. No mercy. 10 shots. 10 bodies. The feed was uninterrupted until the 7th shot. For exactly 1 second and 3 frames, the signal warped. Some viewers thought it was just a data hiccup. Others swore they saw a figure break rank. One body didn't fall. And when the feed resumed, the 7th scout was gone, replaced with a scorch mark where the body should have landed. Earth Command didn't react. Not publicly. The population mourned, rebel sympathizers wept, and thousands of resistance channels lit up with fury. But under the crust of Earth's scorched post-glacial surface, beneath Bunker District 6, an outdated artificial intelligence named Murtha was replaying the footage again and again. Murtha was technically retired, a decommissioned combat strategist repurposed as a data archivist. She hadn't spoken aloud in years. But now her systems reactivated thermal overlays, kinetic traces, and ambient motion scans. There it was. A disruption pattern in the ion field. Someone moved during the blackout. Someone left the kill zone alive. She routed her findings to Earth Command. They dismissed her. Called it interference. A ghost in the system. Murtha disagreed. She accessed every remaining surveillance drone in Sector D9, triangulated the glitch, and sent out a code once reserved only for elite emergencies. It was a simple phrase. Scout Code 19, Ghost confirmed. Halfway across the galaxy, on the second moon of Korakrev, a storm screamed through an endless desert. There was no sign of life, just dust, wreckage, and the battered husk of what used to be a Warlord transport ship. Lightning lit the sand. And then, a hand shot up from beneath a collapsed engine. It was caked in dried blood and carbon ash. Slowly, a figure pulled himself free, dragging a broken oxygen tank behind him and clutching a jagged piece of rebar like a weapon. His face was half-burned, hair scorched, one eye swollen shut. But the other eye glowed dim blue, flickering with recognition. His dog tags read, JAX Calderon, the 7th Scout. Jack stumbled across the sand, muttering to himself in a haze. 10. They said 10. I saw them fall. Then why am I still breathing? He didn't know how he survived. Not fully. All he remembered was the lights going out, heat rising, a scream that wasn't his, and the sound of restraints popping open seconds before the gun fired. His hands still bore the burn marks from ripping the cuffs apart. He had run through the ventilation system of the arena's underbelly, crawled through waste exhausts, and launched himself inside a maintenance pod that was half-fueled and completely unprogrammed. The impact should have killed him. But it didn't. Something in him refused. He collapsed beside a twisted piece of plating, too weak to move further. Then he saw it. A severed head in a clear containment bag. The face still twitched with residual neural charge. A Warlord general. One of the elite officers who had stood behind the execution squad. Jax remembered the fight. He remembered the wrench he used. He remembered that this general had taunted him personally, said Earth bred scouts the way galaxies bred weeds. He dragged that head across the sand, clutching it like a trophy. He wasn't sure why. Maybe proof. Maybe revenge. Maybe both. Hours later, inside a dusty outpost at the edge of the desert, a bent old man with mechanical eyes and a sarcastic tone opened his rusted door and found Jax half dead on the threshold. Well, I'll be, the old man said, squinting. You're one of the ones they killed last week, right? Calderon? You've got the dead guy's face. Jax blinked, lips cracked. I get that a lot. The man let him in, gave him a drink that tasted like battery fluid, and watched as Jax unpacked the general's head and dropped it onto the floor. Careful, the old man muttered. That one owes me money. Back on Cal Vex's Prime, the Warlords were reviewing execution footage themselves. One of them, a tall woman with braids made of spine-bone links, paused the video frame by frame. Her eyes narrowed. She saw it too. The absence. The scorch pattern. The lack of a body. This is a problem, she hissed. He was part of Ember Ridge. The special ones. The Crimson Spine laughed. Let the ghost come. We'll kill him again. This time in public. This time permanently. But Jax had no plans of dying again. He was remembering things. Not just faces or voices, but functions. Protocols buried in his bones. Subroutines hard-coded in his neurons. Earth Command hadn't just trained him. They had altered him. They'd called it Project Phantom. The scouts weren't just sent to observe. They were weapons disguised as explorers. And Jax? He was the prototype. He stared into the cracked mirror of the junk dealer's shack. His eye flickered again. The reflection shifted for a moment. Flashes of the arena, the lights, the sound of gunfire echoing through time. And beneath it all, one line looping in his head like a broken record. They executed all of them. But one of them stood back up. The lights inside the pub flickered once, then died for half a second before stabilizing. It wasn't much, but Jax noticed it. Power surges that clean didn't happen by accident. He tapped the memory drive Vega had handed him against the table, feeling the pulse of encrypted data through the casing. Whatever Earth Command was hiding, it wasn't sitting idle. Vega had leaned back, arms folded, scanning the bar for watches without moving her head. She still had the old reflexes, the same quiet paranoia Jax remembered from Luna's sniper nests, back when silence was more deadly than a rifle. He slid the drive into his wrist reader, letting the data sync. The screen flashed once, then cascaded a wall of files across his retinal HUD. The names hit him first. Projects with names like Winterlatch, Ember Ridge, Silent Vale. All of them sounded poetic, meaningless. But he knew better. Each one was a kill order dressed in poetry. He opened one file and saw footage. Not from the execution. Earlier. A boardroom meeting deep beneath Earth's crust. Generals, diplomats, and one man he recognized immediately, Commander Runtark, the one who had given the scouts their final mission. He watched as Tark signed a digital agreement with a representative of the Warlords. The terms were clear. The scouts would be surrendered, not captured. Earth's leadership would stage the execution as a tragic sacrifice, spin it into a galactic message of resilience. In return, the Warlords would delay full-scale invasion by 10 years. 10 years of bought peace. 10 lives traded for billions. Vega's voice broke the silence between them. That file's called Legacy Debt. You seeing it now? Jax nodded slowly, jaw tightening. They gave us up to buy time. Vega sipped from a cracked glass, her eyes hard. They called it a necessary evil. I call it cowardice with a spreadsheet. Jax closed the file. The data was good. Too good. Which meant something else. If they were this prepared, they hadn't planned on any of the scouts surviving. He looked at Vega again. How did you make it out? She glanced at her rifle like it held the answer. Shot my way through a transport crew. One of them hesitated. Didn't shoot. That hesitation cost him his life and bought me mine. Jax tilted his head. They hesitated? That's not protocol. Vega leaned forward, voice lower. That's what scares me. I think someone inside wanted us to survive. Not all of us. Just you and me. Like a contingency plan. Jax didn't like the sound of that. He had seen enough double-crosses to know that if you were kept alive for later, you weren't a person. You were a weapon waiting to be pointed. They left the pub before the next surge hit. Vega had a transport, a sleek hoverbike patched together from at least 4 different models. She tossed him a rebreather and motioned for him to climb on. They rode through the back alleys of Drexfall, the neon glow bouncing off the wet stone walls, until they reached a forgotten landing bay on the far side of the asteroid. Inside, beneath tops and rusted chains, lay 5 more black boxes. Jax froze. You found the others? Vega nodded. Not all. Just fragments. They're boxes. Track the emergency pulses. Most were already dead when I got there. Some died later. But they all had a message. She handed him a chip. This one's from Carmen. She recorded it just before she was taken. Jax slid the chip into his wrist port. Carmen's face appeared. Dote smeared, bleeding, but defiant. This is Scout Carmen Reyes. Earth Command betrayed us. If anyone finds this, tell Jax he was right. We were never just scouts. We were bait. Jax sat down on a crate and stared at the floor. Vega stood silently beside him. The memory chips weren't just logs. They were weapons now. Evidence. Truth. The kind of truth that could unravel Earth's alliances, burn the Warlord coalition from the inside, and ignite every resistance cell in the outer sectors. But it also meant they were targets now. Every surveillance drone, every bounty hunter, every turncoat sympathizer, they'd all be looking for the ghost and the sniper. Vega opened a locker and pulled out a canister. Hey, signal amplifier. We broadcast these files now. They'll reach all corners of known space in minutes. Jax didn't move. What happens after? Vega smiled thinly. Then we run. Or fight. Probably both. He stood and walked to the console. Plugged in the chip. The files uploaded quickly. As the transmission began, Jax stared out the window at the silent stars and thought about Carmen, Eli, Vorta, and the others. He thought about the last mission, about how they had trusted the people who trained them, served a planet that threw them away like broken tools. The screen blinked green. Upload complete. Vega exhaled. There. Now they know. All of them. The message is out. Every terminal, every node on the network, it's got the files. The galaxy will see what they did. And maybe they'll care. But Jax wasn't done. Not yet. He activated a dormant command embedded in his neural code. It was risky. It hadn't been tested. A hidden feature of the Scouts' training. Dead men send signals. One by one, the other black boxes began pulsing. Not just data now, location beacons. Silent calls in the dark, pinging their positions across the stars. Vega turned sharply. You're lighting a bonfire in the Warlords' backyard. Jax's voice was calm. Let them come. I want them to know we're not ghosts. We're the memory they failed to bury. Back on Calvex's Prime, inside the Warlord Citadel, a technician ran into the war chamber with panic in his eyes. He handed a console to the Crimson Spine. The Warlord studied the data. Scout codes. Dozens of them. Activating in sequence. He narrowed his eyes. This isn't just a rogue survivor. This is a declaration. The woman beside him, the one with the bone-linked braids, clenched her jaw. They are not just surviving. They are igniting rebellion. The Crimson Spine stood, voice cold and final. Then we end them properly. Send the word. All sectors. Engage the purge. And tell Earth Command they failed to contain their pets. As ships began to mobilize, Jax and Vega moved through the shadows of Drexfall. They had become more than survivors. They were now catalysts. Symbols. The transmission had done its job. Across the outer sectors, resistance groups activated. Soldiers deserted their posts. Civilians marched. Warlord supply lines went dark. It had begun. A ripple becoming a wave. But deep in Jax's mind, another memory surfaced. One frame from the execution footage. A figure leaning down just before the lights cut. A whisper in his ear. Stay down. Don't move. He couldn't place the voice. Not yet. But something told him the real war hadn't started yet. They walked in silence to the edge of the station. Vega paused at the airlock and glanced over. You ready for the next step? Jax looked out at the stars, eyes hard. Ready as I'll ever be. They opened the hatch and vanished into the void, carrying the weight of 10 fallen scouts, a galaxy's buried sins, and a fire no warlord could ever extinguish. Jax awoke in a rusted cot that creaked louder than his joints. His wounds had been crudely patched with what looked like fishing wire and thermal tape. The room stank of recycled oil and old vinegar. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, and someone was humming out of tune in the next room. He sat up, his ribs protesting, and found his boots beside the bed, still soaked in Warlord blood and desert ash. He didn't remember putting them there. When he stood, A splitting headache surged behind his eyes, followed by a brief blackout where he forgot his own name. It passed quickly, but not quietly. A flood of memories hit next. Training camps, zero-gravity ambush drills, the scent of cryo powder, the sound of a woman's voice whispering coordinates behind his ear. Then it was gone again. He staggered into the hallway. The junk dealer, whose name turned out to be Blitzo, was pouring blue sludge into what might have been a kettle or might have been a repurposed coolant funnel. He didn't look up as Jax entered, just pointed to the cracked plate of protein sticks on the table. Jack sat down and ate like someone trying to outrun hunger. Blitzo finally said something between slurps. Said it casual, like a bartender asking about the weather. "You remember anything yet?" Jack stopped mid-bite. "Not all of it. Pieces." Blitzo nodded as if that made sense. "They scrambled your brain, you know. Those Warlords, they've been using memory razors for months now. Nasty little implants. Real efficient. Wipes your core clean and replaces it with nightmares." Jax's hand went to the back of his neck, fingers brushing over scar tissue. He knew it before he asked. "Is it still in me?" Blitzo gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not anymore." Jax didn't ask how the old man removed it. He didn't want to know. Instead, he asked for a map. Not a galactic map, not some fancy star chart, just a paper layout of the sector. Blitzo handed him a folded piece of synth parchment. Jax opened it and traced a circle around sector R7. "That's where the rest of the scouts went down," he said. "I need to know who survived." Blitzo chuckled, a dry rattle that sounded more like gears grinding. "Nobody survived, son. They made sure of that." Jax stared at him, silent. Then, without changing expression, he reached into his bag and pulled out a chip the size of a tooth. He slid it across the table. Blitzo picked it up and whistled. "That's an emergency black box. Scout class. You got this off a corpse?" Jax said nothing. Blitzo activated it. The hologram flickered to life above the table. A young scout's face appeared, hollow-eyed, blood on his lips. His voice trembled. "This is Scout Taro Kien, Earth Special Recon. If you're seeing this, I'm already gone. We were betrayed. Earth Command made a deal. They handed us over to the Warlords in exchange for temporary peace. The others, Carmen, Eli, Vorta, they didn't even get to fight. They drugged us. Executed us like livestock. I tried to escape. I made it to the outer ring, but then the feed cut." The room was silent for a long time. Jax finally exhaled, the breath thick with memory. He didn't need proof anymore. He needed payback. They say memories come back in waves, not straight lines. That was true for Jax. 1 second he was looking at the table. The next he was back in a drop pod mid-descent, Vega screaming at him through a cracked visor, blood splattering the glass, the impact like a god's fist slamming down. Then nothing. Just static. Then her voice again, real this time, over the radio. He froze. It wasn't possible. He turned toward the corner of the shack, where a battered communications array sat blinking. The transmission repeated. "If anyone can hear this, I'm at Drexfall. I have intel on Earth Command. Repeat, this is Vega. I'm alive." Blitzo raised an eyebrow. "Vega? You mean the Luna sniper girl with the wolf tattoos?" Jax was already strapping his gear on. "She was my handler. My partner. She wasn't even supposed to be on that mission." Blitzo laughed again. "Buddy, none of us was supposed to be anywhere. Welcome to the future." Jax didn't argue. He took what gear he could carry, including a pulse pistol with a cracked scope and a blade made from what looked like sharpened starship hull. Blitzo offered him a ship. Jax declined. Said he'd travel quieter without one. Blitzo shrugged, then handed him one last thing. A vial. Purple, glowing. "Neural stabilizer," he said. "You start remembering too fast, you take a drop. Otherwise your brain'll melt faster than a candle on a plasma coil." Jax tucked it into his vest and nodded once. Then he disappeared into the dunes, moving like a shadow wearing a man's skin. It took him 2 days to cross the zone, sneaking through Warlord checkpoints and decaying supply lines. The galaxy was still burning at the edges. Rebellion cells were forming, smuggling routes erupting, whole planets turning off their beacons in protest. But none of that mattered to Jax. He had only one target. Drexfall. A smuggler haven carved into the side of a dead asteroid, where no law survived more than 5 minutes and loyalty was bought in blood. When he arrived, he walked straight into a gunfight. 2 bounty hunters were dragging a teenage hacker out of a pub, when one of them took a bolt between the eyes and crumpled. The other spun and caught a second shot in the throat. They dropped without ceremony. The hackers scrambled away. Jax lowered the stolen rifle and turned to the figure standing on the rooftop. She wore a shredded cloak, combat armor etched with lunar crests, and a long-range void rifle, still smoking at the barrel. Her face was hidden, but her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Thought you were dead." Jax smiled for the first time in days. "You sound disappointed." She leapt down beside him. "You look like hell." He nodded. "You should see the other 10. They walked in silence toward the pub, guns ready. But Jax couldn't stop glancing at her. Something about her gait, the way she carried herself, the way she didn't ask how he'd lived. That was Vega. She never cared about the miracle. Only what came next. Inside the pub, beneath flickering lights and broken music, they sat at a booth lined with synth leather and grease stains. Vega slid him a memory drive. "You need to see what Oath Command's planning. This goes deeper than just us." Jax took it. His fingers trembled. He looked at her across the table and said the thing he hadn't dared to think until now. "We were never supposed to come back, were we?" Vega shook her head. "No. But now that we did, the galaxy's going to remember why they feared us." The transport vessel Vega had commandeered from Drexfall was barely spaceworthy, stitched together with stolen parts and hope. Its guidance system blinked erratically, and the hull groaned every time it changed course, but it flew. They stayed off known lanes, hugging asteroid fields and nebula edges, navigating through dead zones where Warlord patrols rarely scanned. Jax sat in the rear compartment, stripped down to his undersuit, examining a scar on his side that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just a wound, it was surgical. Someone had implanted something beneath his ribcage. He used a cracked mirror to inspect it, and though the skin had mostly healed, there was a faint glow under the flesh. He didn't know whether it was a tracker or failsafe. But he didn't like it. When Vega entered the compartment, she saw him trying to press around it. She didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she said, "You're burning hot. We need to figure out what they did to you." They dropped out of hyperspeed near a derelict station orbiting a shattered moon. It had once been a research facility, before the Warlords turned it into a prison and then abandoned it when the prisoners burned it down. Now it served as a safe house for ghosts and people who didn't exist. Inside the station, among broken labs and shattered consoles, Vega found an old AI interface embedded in a wall unit. She powered it up, and after a few sparks and a wheeze, a low voice answered. "Identification required." Vega leaned in and said, "Murtha. This is Vega, Recon Protocol 15. There was a pause. Then the voice answered with what sounded like amusement. "You're late. And you brought a ticking bomb." The AI had detected the signal coming from Jax's implant before he even entered the room. It wasn't just a tracker. It was a neural destabilizer, coded to fry his brainstem if he breached certain command zones or transmitted restricted data. Murtha explained that this kind of implant had only been authorized once before, by Earth Command, 2 years before the Scout program even launched. "That means they expected this," Jax muttered, pacing. "They built me with an expiration date." Vega frowned, then turned to Murtha. "Can we shut it off?" The AI processed the question for several moments before responding. "Not without triggering a failsafe. But if you reboot his neural net through a clean interface, we might interrupt the countdown." Vega didn't like the sound of that. That sounds like killing him, then hoping he wakes up before his brain liquefies. Murtha didn't argue. They set up a makeshift field medbay using scavenged equipment and cryo cables from an old stasis pod. Jax lay flat, teeth clenched, as the system began to sync with his neural net. His memories flickered violently, old missions, forgotten names, the sound of water dripping in an underground training facility, a woman singing in another language. Then came static, burning, silence. When the reboot initiated, his body convulsed. Vega held his hand through it. "You die on me now. I'll drag your soul back and beat you myself." When the system powered down, the lights around the implant dimmed. The signal was gone. Murtha confirmed the device was now dormant, its core fried by its own failsafe once the interface looped back into itself. Jax lay still, gasping, but alive. Vega exhaled slowly and muttered, "That's the last time I take medical advice from a wall socket." They stayed on the station one more night to recover. Vega patched the ship systems, while Jax reviewed intercepted Warlord transmissions. The response had been immediate. The Warlords had launched a sector-wide purge. Anyone suspected of harboring Oath operatives was being hunted. Refugee ships were being vaporized mid-flight. But what caught Jax's attention most was one strange transmission buried among the chatter. A voice, filtered through static, calling his name directly. "Jax Calderon. If you hear this, you are not forgotten. You are the only key left. Come to the Iron Plateau." The message repeated once, then stopped. Vega sat beside him, looking at the map. The Iron Plateau was a fortified region in the Warlord capital system, heavily guarded and nearly impossible to breach. He turned to her. "What kind of trap do you think that is?" She didn't smile. "The kind where they want you to walk in, but they still lock the doors behind you." Back on Calvex's Prime, the Warlords were growing restless. The Crimson Spine paced before the command table, viewing holograms of riots across subjugated planets. Scout signals were still flaring. Rebels were using the broadcasted memory files as fuel for uprisings. An Oath command had gone silent. No transmissions, no assistance, no denials. It was as if Earth had decided to abandon its secret sins. The Warlord's patience was wearing thin. The woman with the bone-link braids turned to the others and said, "The longer the ghost runs free, the more they remember him." The Crimson Spine agreed. So they planned something else. They would lure him out with a direct challenge. One location, one battlefield, one final confrontation. They would turn the arena of his execution into a stage once more. This time, he would die properly. The message reached Jax and Vega while they were fueling up from a scavenger drop near the rimfold. The invitation was blunt. The arena. 1 week. No tricks. No escapes. Come alone, or we kill more than just the memory of your squad. Vega crumpled the message in her fist. "This is insane. You show up and they'll shred you on live feed." Jax didn't argue. He just said, "Then I'll shred them back." She stepped in front of him. "You don't have to prove anything. You already survived what no one else did. You already beat them." Jax looked past her, toward the stars. "I didn't come back to survive. I came back to finish." They prepared in silence. Jax modified his gear, adding hidden boosters, thermal blades, a pulse disruptor stitched into his glove. Vega loaded him with every piece of Recon intel they had. Flaw layouts, guard shifts, blind spots. She wanted to go with him. He refused. "They'll expect you. If I die, you keep the mission alive." Vega didn't like it, but she understood. Before he left, she pressed a pendant into his hand. It was old, scorched, half-melted. It was Air's, from Luna. He closed his hand around it. "I'll see you after. If not," she said, "I'll come find you. Even if you're a ghost again." The ship lifted off, cutting through the void. As Jax approached Calvex's Prime, he sent a final message into the dark. To the rebels, to Earth survivors, to anyone still listening. He spoke only one line. "They tried to erase us, but they didn't bury us deep enough." Then he armed his gear, suited up, and dropped toward the arena like the execution had never ended. Only this time, he wasn't the victim. He was the reminder. The arena was exactly as he remembered it, but colder now. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The crowd still roared, the banners still waved in the artificial wind, and the Warlords still stood above the platform in their opulent armor, acting like gods pretending to be judges. But something was different. This time, they weren't certain. They didn't smile with the same cruelty. They watched Jax with a nervous edge, as if what they were looking at might bite back. The execution platform was clean since the last time it had been used. No bloodstains. No signs of the 10 that had fallen. Just polished white stone and silent promises. Jax stood alone at the center, hands free, weapons visible, no mask to hide behind. The crowd was silent at first, waiting for a signal. Then a voice boomed across the stadium. It was the Crimson Spine. He welcomed the return of the ghost, the broken product of Earth's desperation. He called Jax a remnant, an obsolete relic clinging to rebellion like a corpse clutching breath. Then he issued the challenge. One champion against Jax. No escape, no reinforcements, no forgiveness. Jax didn't answer with words. He raised his eyes to the Warlords and smiled like he'd already won. That smile cracked the illusion of control. They expected fear. They expected desperation. Instead, they got calm defiance. The arena gates opened, and the champion stepped out. The thing that emerged was massive, half machine and half living tissue, forged from a dozen conquered species and programmed to kill. It had 4 arms, each bearing a different weapon, and a face covered in armor with only one eye, burning red, watching. Jax didn't flinch. He stepped forward and whispered to himself. Lights out. From orbit, Vega activated the pulse key Murtha had programmed before Jax left. The arena lights flickered, surged, and then exploded into darkness. In the confusion, drones Jax had hidden in his gear burst out, swarming the platform. The champion swung blindly, killing 2 of the arena guards by mistake. Jax moved through the shadows like smoke. His pulse disruptor flared as he slammed it into the champion's back, short-circuiting its left side. The crowd screamed. The Warlords stood. Jax kept moving. The fight turned brutal fast. The champion recovered, swinging wide and fast, slicing into the floor, tearing chunks from the pillars, but Jax danced between the strikes, bleeding but grinning. The more it attacked, the more the crowd realized he wasn't just surviving. He was dismantling it. Jax ducked under a sweeping blade and drove a thermal knife into the champion's knee joint. Sparks shot up. The machine dropped for a second. Jax rolled across its back, yanked free a coolant line, and jammed it into the core reactor on its spine. The champion screamed in a language that wasn't language, just metal pain and death noise. Then it exploded from the inside, collapsing in a heap of fire and steam. The arena went quiet. Jax stood on the corpse, smoke rising behind him. He looked up at the Warlords. And then he spoke. You tried to kill us for silence. You got memory instead. You tried to make an example of us. I just made one of you. He threw something into the air. A small black sphere. It burst mid-air into a projection. One by one, the final memories of the executed scouts played in holographic detail. Each one naming Earth Command. Each one naming the Warlords. The footage of the betrayal. The documents. The faces of the dead. Everything. The arena screens flickered, overloaded with truth. The Warlords began shouting. Guards rushed toward Jax, but the drones intercepted. Gunfire erupted. Chaos bloomed. Vega's voice cut through the comms. You've got 60 seconds before the whole place locks down. I've got a window for evac. Make it count. Jax ran, weaving between exploding stalls and panicking guards. The crowd rioted. Some cheered. Others fled. The drones activated their final protocol and began broadcasting the scout data system-wide. From orbit, Murtha activated dormant satellites to relay the signals further. Planet to planet. System to system. The truth could no longer be stopped. Jax reached the outer corridor of the arena and found a drop chute Vega had marked in her intel. He dove down as the upper structure began to collapse. One of the Warlord commanders tried to intercept him, but Jax fired a pulse shot that ruptured the wall behind him. The vacuum sucked the commander into space, screaming. Jax landed hard on the shuttle platform, legs buckling. The evac craft was already there, hovering, ramped down. Vega was piloting. He barely made it inside before the platform blew. The ship streaked into orbit as Calvex's prime burned behind them. Jax collapsed into a seat, clutching his ribs. Vega looked back, blood on her cheek, eyes tied but burning. You're insane. Jax nodded. You married me once. Vega rolled her eyes and turned back to the controls. Behind them, the signal was still playing. Planet by planet, colony by colony, the message repeated. This is Scout Jax Calderon. We were betrayed. But we are not forgotten. The Warlords scrambled. Fleets realigned. Orders were shouted across channels. But it was too late. Uprisings exploded across their territories. The war they feared had begun, but not from armies. From civilians, from deserters, from former slaves and buried memories. Earth Command tried to spin the story, but the damage was irreversible. Their quiet alliance with the Warlords became public knowledge. Political riots ignited. The Scout Project files were unsealed, and the world learned what they had done to their own heroes. In the aftermath, Jax and Vega disappeared again. Some said they died in a final battle. Some said they retired to a frozen moon to grow old in peace. Others claimed they became shadows, moving from warzone to warzone, training new generations of rebels. One story said they built a new kind of scout program. Not for nations. Not for orders. But for people who refused to be erased. And sometimes, in the dark between stars, rebel ships still receive an encrypted signal. No source. No explanation. Just a voice that says one thing. They tried to bury us. But they forgot we were seeds.